Hi, this is Max Tanev, and you're listening to Byte Back, the podcast that explores the intersection between psychology, technology, and societies. In this episode, and the final installment of my mini-series on the new era of psychedelics, I speak to the Sociable's very own Tim Hinchliffe about the transformative power of psilocybin mushrooms. We speak a lot about Tim's own experiences with mushrooms and other psychedelics, the importance of set and setting, psilocybin for therapeutic uses, and even psychedelic use during isolation. Hope you enjoy the show.
This episode is brought to you by Publicize, a digital PR company that grows businesses' online presence. And for a limited time only, exclusive to Byte Back listeners, you can receive an SEO assessment as part of your package for any tier of service at no extra charge with this special promotion. To find out more, visit publicize.co/BBB. Tim
Hinchliffe is the editor of The Sociable, a technology news blog that picks apart how technology transforms society and vice versa. Tim is a longtime psychonaut, having spent a fair few years experimenting with various types of psilocybin mushrooms. His journey with psilocybin has landed him as a perfect guest to talk about their transformative value. Tim, welcome to the podcast.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.
So to get started, I want to ask you, when did you first start experimenting with psilocybin mushrooms, and what was it that drove you to first try them?
Yeah, that was 17 years ago. So I was 18 at the time, and it was my freshman year at university. And I went to university in the Pacific Northwest in Washington State. So there is an abundance of these mushrooms. But previously, I hadn't really known much about them. But when I was in the dorms, just a bunch of people I met and friends that I made, they had them. And so they said that, yeah, you can see things, see patterns and stuff swirls. And yeah, it's really crazy, a lot of fun. So for me, like, I had no idea. There's nothing I could have been prepared that could have prepared me for the experience. So I just thought it was like, oh, it's like smoking weed and then maybe like a little extra visual fun. But no, it was way more than that.
So your first experience with psilocybin mushrooms, was it really powerful in terms of, surpassing all of those expectations that you had, that it was just going to be like smoking weed and then getting some cool visuals?
Yeah, it was it completely did a whole like debugging of my body and of my mind and of everything. It was an incredibly powerful experience. I was not prepared at all. So what I did is that I ate probably close to 4 grams of dried cubensis mushrooms, and I ate them alone. I didn't do them with anyone else, and this was my first time. So it I wasn't prepared for like the initial anxiety that kind of crept up. So when it was coming up, like I started getting waves of anxiety, and I didn't know what to do with it. And then once the visuals started happening, so once I started looking around at the walls were breathing, the carpet was spiraling into little snakes and things. I didn't know how to deal with that because I'd never experienced anything like that before. So what I did was I closed my eyes. But of course, that didn't help at all. So when I closed my eyes, everything was just amplified. And then when I opened my eyes again, whatever I was seeing in my closed eyes visuals were projected out into the dorm room where I had first taken them and where I still was. So it was something that was turned on and I couldn't turn it off. And that was out of my control. So what I did was I tried to fight it. And fighting it just made it worse. So later on, I started thinking during the same trip, I started thinking, all right, well, what can make me happy? All this crazy stuff is happening around me, but what can I do? What would I normally do that can give me some peace and comfort or something? So I thought, all right, maybe I'll go look at the computer and put on a movie or something. But as soon as I opened up the laptop, the computer screen, just the desktop, the background image, that was moving and morphing into its own movies. So like I couldn't even look at a solid object without that thing going splintering off into a million pieces. So okay, that's not going to work. So then I started thinking again, all right, well, maybe I'll go visit my friend in this other dorm. And then I started thinking, well, what are you going to do after that? I don't know if it was me thinking or the mushroom telling me. It was like, all right, what are you going to do next? And I said, well, I'm going to come right back here. Okay, well, then what if I go out for a walk? What's going to happen after that? You're going to come right back here to the dorm room, right where you are. And the more I thought about that, I got locked in this temporal loop of thinking, no, everything on the outside That's not going to do anything to bring me happiness. What it is something inside. It has to come from within. You have to be comfortable in this moment because this is what's going on right now. And that thought process overwhelmed me, that to the point where I lay down on the bed, crawled up in the fetal position, and I just said, okay, it seems like this is going to happen forever. This is never going to end. This is the way it's going to be. I'm ready to die. And I accepted that. And so that was pretty much the experience I had the first time. But it was coming down from that afterwards where I just felt an elation, a glow, like I just survived. I just went through the gauntlet. I just went through some kind of battle or some kind of ritual routine process, and I came out the other side way more refreshed. The next day, I had tons of energy. Colors were brighter. I was happy about everything. So that was my first time. And then my second time was just probably about a week or two later, and I decided to do it with friends, and I had a completely different experience. It was just one of those fun times going out, and it was a nice bonding experience.
Wow, that sounds really intense. I find it really interesting that even though you went into that first experience completely unprepared for what was coming your way, you still learned some really profound lessons. I think people always advise others to enter psychedelic experiences with as much preparation and intention as possible. But even without any of that, it still taught you some really valuable lessons.
Yeah, indeed. Because I mean, my whole process of thinking before that, I just come out of high school. I was busy in sports all the time. I never thought about consciousness. I never thought about, inner working, what'll make you happy and things. And to be frank, I probably through high school I was cocky and just didn't care what anybody else thought, and I just did whatever I wanted. And so without all that external stimuli and just focusing everything within, that was a huge shocker for me. So it forced me to learn right away. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. And as you began to experiment more with psilocybin mushrooms the following years, how did you become more comfortable with some of those, I wouldn't say darker sides of psychedelic trips, but perhaps the ones which are more prone to inducing anxious feelings and negative thoughts? How did you learn how to deal with those and understand that, I guess, fundamentally there are no bad trips, there are only just ways to deal with whatever it throws your way?
Yeah, well, during that time, so probably from around 2003 to 2010, I did them quite a lot. And I was always anxious before because I remembered the first time that I took them and how powerful that was. Even though I had many great experiences, there were a couple of them afterwards that still I think about to this day, just how frightening they were to me. And that's actually one of the reasons why I held off on doing them. So after 2010, I didn't take any until just last February. So it was 10 years. Yeah. So, well, to answer the question, yeah, I couldn't really prepare. I just knew that this stuff could happen. But another thing to keep in mind is, well, I have something called celiac disease where I can't eat gluten, anything with wheat and that sort of thing. So I didn't know that until relatively recently. So during all this time that I was experimenting with mushrooms, I was eating glutinous things that were really hurting my stomach. And so that I'm sure had an effect on some of my trips because the physical part of it was just amplified. And so that kind of got me stuck in a bad place for a bit. But I remember one instance that really frightened me. And it wasn't nothing really that I saw or heard or anything. It was just a complete paralysis that I felt. So I had gone to, this was in Bellingham, Washington. I went to Whatcom Falls, these waterfalls, with some friends and ate mushrooms. And for some reason, when I was there, we started walking and they're like, hey, we got to go. And I'm like, okay, I don't know why, but yeah, that's how it goes. So started walking. Then all of a sudden, I just had to lean up against a wooden railing that was there. I leaned on it, and all of a sudden, I just found myself slumped over on it. And I was just hanging there, slumped over, kind of on my knees, with my arm hanging up over this thing, and I couldn't move. I was just stuck there. No matter what, they're like, then let's go, let's go. And I tried every single force. It's like sleep apnea or sleep paralysis or something. And I couldn't move. And it just freaked me out. And I was like, I can't. And I was saying like through clenched teeth, I can't move, guys. I can't move. And I don't know how long I was there for, but it was a very frightening experience. And then one of my friends just came up to me. He was smoking a joint. He put it in my mouth from his hand right to my mouth. And I just took one. I didn't even inhale on that one. I just blew it a little bit, and I just popped right up. it just took that one little thing. I just popped right up and I was walking and I was fine. But for some reason, that paralysis, that thing, that what happened, that has made me anxious before going into any other trip afterwards. Just knowing that could happen. But now with this last trip, I think I have integrated a lot of things. So now about the anxiety, I had a lot of anxiety going into this trip that was in February when I took it right here at home. But the thing is that everything that I learned from all my mushroom experiences prior, I've already incorporated and integrated into my life, into my decision making, my thinking, my problem solving, my ways of going about things. So when this trip came along in February, it was the gentlest, easiest thing. And when I started to feel lift off after about 15, 20 minutes, and when I got to the peak where I went out and kind of walked into the hills, into the mountains of Colombia and in the wooded area and kind of lost my mind for a little bit, I wasn't afraid. It wasn't out of my element because I knew how to surrender. I knew not to fight it. And those are characteristics or I don't know, techniques that I use in everyday life, which I had learned years ago from the first few times that I had taken the mushrooms.
Yeah, I think that's it, isn't it? Just knowing that resisting is anything that comes towards you, no matter how unfamiliar, is it's not the reaction to have, and the more we surrender to the experience, the more we'll get out of it.
Yeah,
So
exactly.
you said you took quite a long break until February. Was it the February of this year or of 2019?
Yeah, this year,
This year. Oh, just
just
gone.
under 2
Wow.
months ago. Yeah.
Yeah, that's really recent. So what was it that made you want to take them again after such a long break?
Well, I've been studying mushrooms now for 5 years or so. So I quit drinking alcohol because I'm a recovering alcoholic. So I quit drinking alcohol 5 years ago. And just at that time, a neighbor of mine, out of the blue, just came over and handed me a mushroom that he had picked that was just growing in the yard. And it was an Amanita muscaria mushroom. It's the one, the Super Mario one, the red top with the white specks. And he asked me, "Do you know what is this mushroom?" And I said, "I don't know. Why don't I know this?" So then I started studying mycology, studying mushrooms, and that got me interested. And since I'm living in Colombia now, there's lots of biodiversity here and a lot of mushrooms. So I began going out looking for them just as a hobby, something to keep my mind off of drinking and doing something productive and healthy and a new hobby. So yeah, so I started searching for magic mushrooms for years. Oh, and actually 4 years ago, I did find a lot. 4 years ago, I found about 1,000 Panelius cinctulus. It's a psilocybin-containing mushroom. It's the most common in the world. It appears in all 50 states, and it's all over the place, and it's also very weak as well. I found those in 2016. I just wasn't ready with my own personal life, having just quit drinking, to go into eating them at that time and for all this time because it's been so long and I'm a different person and things have changed that I didn't know if I took them if I'd be bringing up old demons or something or if I was just frightened also of getting paralyzed again. But of course that didn't happen. So the reason the long break was, one, I wasn't in the right mental state, and two is that, well, for a long time I didn't have access to any of the mushrooms. So why this occurred in February is because just a week before, I had met up with a amateur mushroom group, a Facebook group, and we went for a hike and we found them. So there, I finally had the mushrooms. I knew what they were. I identified them. I had studied them for years now. The people I was with had confirmed, yeah, these are the ones, of course. And so then I had them. And so it's like, all right, now's the time. Like I have them. It's safe. It's been 5 years since I quit drinking. It's been 10 years since I ate mushrooms. And I think my brain, my way of thinking may have become stagnant. I'm open to new possibilities. I want to see what the mushroom tells me now that I'm older, I'm more mature. I was really intrigued by the prospect of new things, exciting things that could happen.
Yeah, that's amazing. That's really cool. I think it's also cool that you found that community. An amateur mushroom group sounds like a really cool group of people that I'd definitely be interested in getting to know.
Yeah, they're very passionate.
Great. So, you mentioned set and setting. I mean, I'm not sure how many times that you've taken mushrooms you've been alone or with other people, but how does that setting of being around others, being alone, being in nature, being in your house? Like, how have you found that those different factors have influenced your trips over the years?
I prefer being alone during these trips because I get sucked into what other people are experiencing. Because the mushroom elicits empathy and eliminates barriers. So there's no difference between me and the other person and the experience. So the two experiences meld into one. So that's why I don't like getting sucked into other people's trips, because then I can't work on my own experience. Everything just blurs together. So that's why I like doing alone. And then for the set, yeah, that's the mindset going into it. So for me, I didn't take mushrooms for a long time because one, I didn't have them, and two is because of my mindset. I was too fearful. I was operating from a place of fear based on my previous experiences, and I just quit drinking, so I didn't know how how that would affect me. Oh yeah, getting back to the setting part. So I prefer being out in nature. I've never done what Terrence McKenna always suggests, doing 5 grams in silent darkness. I've never been able to do that, or I never tried, and I never haven't wanted to yet. Although it's still a prospect, a possibility that I'm looking at on the horizon. I like being out in nature just because of, well, the way it makes you feel. So I was looking at this a couple of weeks ago when I got up and started walking around, and I was feeling the effects of the psilocybin. Just looking at the succulent plants, which are all Fibonacci sequenced, golden ratio, fractals, and it just brings a feeling of peace, of connectedness, of oneness with all of nature, and that it makes you feel you're never alone. It just makes you feel like this is at home. And that's another thing too, is that when I took these mushrooms for the first time in 10 years, it felt like slipping into a warm dream or something. It felt like there was something there welcoming me back. It was a very gentle thing. It was a feeling of coming home. And it just makes me think about all these different higher levels of consciousness, of different levels of reality, and just the invisible landscapes that are out there, that there's more to reality than what we see with our everyday perceptions.
Yeah, that's amazing. And I definitely know what you mean about enjoying psychedelics in nature. I mean, for the handful of psychedelic experiences that I've had with psilocybin and LSD, I've been outside in nature, in kind of varying levels, kind of varying from a park in a city in the UK to the Colombian rainforest, but still
Mm.
like around trees, around plants, around flowers, around things that you want to marvel at when you're under the influence of a psychedelic like that. And to me, the thought now of taking them and staying enclosed in a room or keeping my eyes closed for the entire experience, I'm not saying that I don't recognize that. I'm sure there's value in that, and that's definitely the way that a lot of these clinical trials are being ran. I personally couldn't imagine what that would even be like, because looking at nature and getting sucked into it all and having that feeling of connectedness with the earth is such a major part of psychedelics for me. That yeah, I think it would be really interesting to see what the fuss is about with the other side as well.
Right. And I think one of my the way I resisted it is because, like I said, talking about my first experience, that first experience, maybe that's something I need to conquer, is that when I close my eyes, it freaked me out because I couldn't shut it off. And so that was scarier. That was more frightening than opening my eyes and seeing the whole world around me, that I kind of know through that psychedelic lens. But when closing the eyes, it just freaked me out. So it's deeply penetrating into the psyche, and it's something I've stayed away from.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. But I guess, I mean, we're recording this under isolation conditions during coronavirus, and I guess there's probably going to be a lot of people that still have that psychedelic itch, but not the ability to go outside into nature to trip. So, I've already kind of read a few things online of people taking psychedelics under quarantine, and while it's definitely a way to experience them being at home and perhaps like cozy and comfortable, it seems like when that's enforced, that's probably not the right setting for most people to go into a psychedelic trip, that they actually don't have the option even if they wanted to to leave. But yeah, what do you think about that?
But well, I can actually also speak from a little bit of experience as well of being in cramped spaces on previous experiences. So yeah, there's one time I had taken LSD and then I had to get on a flight, and it was a long flight because 5 hour, 6 hour flight. Or no, it was two flights with a layover, so that was even freakier. Yeah, so I had gone somewhere and went to an event, and I took LSD after this event, and then it was in the nighttime, but I forgot or just didn't think about how acid can take 12 hours or more. I mean, the duration of it. So all through the night, of course, I was up tripping, and then I had to take a flight in the morning, and I realized, oh shit, this is still going on. And getting on an airplane, going through airport security was freaky as hell. I had set myself off to the side, unloaded my bags, and I took all the stuff out of my bags, my carry-on before going through security because I didn't know it was metal. And there was a crowd gathered around me. They're all looking at me. It was freaky. Then when I got onto the plane, the seats in front of me, the designs, the patterns in the fabric and the seats in front of me were turning into little Aztec warriors dancing around in circles. And I actually started hiding underneath my tray table, and the stewards had to come by and tell me to get out. And then just the flight itself, just not being able to get up, being able to move. The person next to me looked over as a young person and had some acne on his chin, and the acne around the chin started to look like volcanoes erupting in a ring of fire. And this went on for hours. And so that was just my experience of being in a trapped place. So now getting back to being in isolation, being in quarantine, it depends on the individual. I mean, I bet some people can find a lot of solace and peace and solitude in an experience while being under quarantine. But yeah, but me no. Especially if it's under a forced condition, like you say, like you have to be in there, like there's no escape, you can't go out. Then that kind of puts an extra added layer of pressure, which can affect the mood and affect the outcome of the experience, I think. And I think that's a reason why that on my last mushroom trip, I was at home, but my home is out in the mountains and there's a lot of space. So I didn't have to worry about external things like, where's my keys? Did I drive here? Is someone going to come up here? Am I going to run into somebody? Am I going to have to play it cool? So that was very comforting for me. And well, I guess that it could also be comforting for people at home who are comfortable enough with themselves to take psychedelics in a quarantine environment.
Yeah, absolutely. And that trip on the airplane sounds extremely intense. I love how graphically you have these memories of the erupting acne on the guy's chin. So just kind of lingering on that virus. So perhaps it's obviously not for everyone taking psychedelics under these quarantine conditions, but how do you think psilocybin or psychedelics more generally have helped people in dealing with these uncertain times?
Well, yeah, it's like the old Greek aphorism, know thyself. So when you know yourself, then you're more comfortable in any situation. So people who do take psychedelics, not just like as in going to a concert or a rave or a party or something, but those who kind of do work with it for personal development, just like going back to my first trip, like everything outside isn't going to bring me happiness. It's all from within. And so I think that if people who have taken psychedelics, I think, and actually use them for personal work, they can be more prepared for this type of thing. They can be more at peace with themselves and not get anxious, not desire outside things. They can just be happy with themselves because they know themselves.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think that's a really, really good point, how psychedelics do really help you familiarize yourself with your own mind in a way that not many things do. I would kind of put psychedelics and meditation into similar brackets for one, but I can see how the lessons that people have learned from psychedelics can be applied in really important ways under these circumstances that we're in right now. Zoom out a little bit. I want to ask you about your general kind of view of the changing tide towards psilocybin in recent years. How have you seen people's attitudes change, especially as psychedelics are becoming a little bit more mainstream, I think, with there being, more funding for research and clinical trials for medical and therapeutic use of substances like psilocybin and MDMA. How are you looking at the whole picture right now?
Yeah, it's great. So I read The Spirit Molecule by Dr. Rick Strassman a couple years ago. That Dr. Strassman, he's I think the University of New Mexico, and he's the one who broke through the legal barriers in the 1990s with his clinical studies of, I don't know if it's clinical, but it's studies of DMT, dimethyltryptamine. And so that just opened up the door for many more researchers because it had been banned since the 1970s, I believe, and there was amazing progress that was done before then. So nowadays, let's fast forward 10 years after Strassman, Dr. Roland Griffiths of Johns Hopkins University came out with a study on how psilocybin illicits can occasion mystical experiences. This is great for getting mainstream thinking towards this. So a lot of what the promise and the studies are showing is all about kind of how it really reduces like psilocybin can reduce anxiety and the fear of death in terminal cancer patients. Another one was, oh yeah, breaking addictions like for alcoholism or smoking and things of that nature, kind of therapeutic things. But I'm really interested right now is in this this research that's coming out on the analogs of psilocybin. So you can tell that I've talked more about psilocybin because that's what I prefer over the other psychedelics. So yeah, I'm coming from a bee mushroomed point of view because the analogs of psilocybin. So mushrooms have psilocybin and some psilocin. These are active psychoactive ingredients. But there's other ingredients that are part of that as well. They're called the derivatives of psilocybin, and these are things like compounds like baeocystin, norbaeocystin, and norpsilocin. And they're just coming. I think it was only in the past year that they've been able to identify these and isolate them, and they have no idea what they do. And so I'm really interested in what are the kind of properties of these. And I got the inspiration actually from watching the mycologist Paul Stamets on the Joe Rogan Experience, and Stamets talked about baeocystin on its own as something that could be researched. And while I don't think that really much is known about these compounds, like what their effects are, I'm interested in knowing if like there's a way to isolate some of those sixth senses that you can get from psilocybin. So one of them, just a feeling, of something watching you or something like that. One of the properties of psilocybin, and maybe possibly it's due to one of the derivatives, is visual acuity. So especially in low doses, if you take the mushroom, colors are enhanced and your peripheral vision is greatly enhanced. It also at higher doses too, and especially on the come down. So my last trip, this was at nighttime now. So I started just before night and it became nighttime. And I had a bonfire or a campfire blazing. And so I was sitting down, staring directly into the campfire. So I'm looking into flames when it's nighttime. And I just shouted, when I looked at the flames, I shouted, Sarihuella, which is the Spanish word for opossum. And sure enough, I looked up from the fire, turned my head a full 90 degrees to the right, and I saw from 30 feet off a possum running across a branch of a tree onto the roof of, no, not onto the roof, but it was running across the branch of a tree. And I was blown away. I was like, how did I see that? That's these chemicals, these compounds, they hack the brain. It's like some type of it's like a technology, and that's why I wrote an article on that recently about the mushroom experience and acting like a technology, because it works on the hardware, it works on the body's software, and it just does so many different things, and it's like plugging into some sort of technological process.
That's so interesting that you say that about heightened senses, because that's definitely something that I remember very clearly from my first psilocybin trip, is feeling like my eyesight had actually gotten better. And I don't have any problems with my eyesight anyway, but I literally felt like I was looking at things in HD. Like obviously the colors were enhanced, but I felt like I could see a lot more detail than I usually could, and it blew my mind.
Yeah, exactly. And DARPA, Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency, they're looking to Schedule One drugs in the U.S. to help soldiers with PTSD and other ailments. But one of the things they said is that many drugs produce side effects called hallucinations. And so they might not be looking at that psilocybin then, or they might be looking at the derivatives. Who knows? But I mean, they could be looking at MDMA or ketamine or something as well. But I thought that was really interesting that they call hallucinations side effects, and I see those as hallucinations as visions, as something kind of essential to the trip. It's like I also saw a report just the other day of companies that are looking to eliminate any bad trips from happening. Like, I don't know how they're going about that. To me, it's like, all right, so if you take the psychedelic for analogy, I'm guessing it's kind of like white water rafting or something like that. So if you take the pure form, the full thing, the full blown hallucinations, the visions, and everything, there's it's like an element of danger to it, an element of excitement, an element of that's where you learn is when you're putting into these situations where you're forced to either surrender, or go along for the ride, so like if you go whitewater rafting, there's that element of danger. And if you take that experience out, I think of that as like going into the theater and watching whitewater rafting on a screen. You're sitting there in the comfort, nothing's going to happen to you, it, and that's it. But being thrown into the middle of it, into that danger, into the unknown, that's where you test yourself. That's where the learning occurs. That's where the metaphors come from. I remember not even a psychedelic experience, but just things in general that you get from being in nature and doing experiences in living life. Is I went to a place, a town not too far from, or, well, 4 hours from where I live, and I went into the river, and kind of jungly, and there was a point where I had to climb up on the rocks because I couldn't go through the river anymore. And then I found a place where it's like, oh, I'm up at this high area on the rock, and in order to get to the other side, because I can't go any further on this side, you've got to cross. But I'm already high up on the rock, so what do I do? And I look down and like, well, I don't know how deep it is, but it was just like, well, sometimes in life you got to jump, and so I jumped. And so that's kind of like the psychedelic experience too. Is like in that rush of jumping and the learning that you get from it, just you can apply later in life. It's like the same thing with the psychedelic experience. So I think that the full experience is necessary.
Yeah, absolutely. I completely agree. And I think trying to see psychedelics through that lens of pure recreation, that, trying to engineer them so that they can get rid of the possibility of a bad trip is, you're not going to have the most valuable experiences that way. Like you said, doing something that scares you, that makes you nervous or anxious, often provides the biggest result in the end of it. And I think that really applies to psychedelic experiences. Often the toughest ones are the ones that you learn the most from.
Exactly, but again, who knows what the properties are of these things, and what the experiences would be like without that trip. I mean, it wouldn't be what we were just describing. It'd be something else, but that in its own way, it could be beneficial as well in certain areas, especially in therapeutic areas. And I just don't see it right now. Yeah, it's too early to tell what
Mhm.
the actual results and outcomes of those will be.
Yeah. And I think that that type of research and those type of companies in tech startup community is getting interested in psychedelic plant medicines like psilocybin is definitely a symptom of a wider changing tide in attitudes towards these substances. Do you think that there's any sort of danger of, I don't want to say these things like getting into the wrong hands, but people trying to do the wrong things with them, or pitching them in the wrong way, I guess?
I mean, you can talk about like commercialization, which if people are in it, like I've seen comparisons about the cannabis industry, how that booms, and then they're talking about replicating that with mushrooms or psychedelics, but I don't think that'll ever happen, because I mean, it's not an addicting thing, and after you take, if you have a psychedelic experience, it's not like you want to go and have it again the next day. It took me 10 years between trips. So I mean, so that's like supply and demand, and the frequency of use is completely different. I'm the editor of the Sociable here, so I've been writing about technology for years, and the thing about technology is that it's neither good nor bad. It's just a tool. It's how you use it. It's who uses it and for what purposes. So that I take that same thinking to the psychedelic arena. But that being said, I think to go a little deeper, like if these substances become widely available and widespread, and there's no system in place that kind of integrates them, then there can be a lot of problems. And then I think you go back to the 1960s and the whole scare back then of people going crazy or jumping out windows or whatever. Because what happens, I think, in our culture, at least in Western culture, is that we don't have the initiations, we don't have the rituals, we don't have shamans anymore. And I remember one of my great, my favorite researchers, Graham Hancock. He's spoken with the shamans, and he said that Western civilization has severed its connection with spirit. And so, if we don't have the mechanisms in place to integrate all the experience, then I can see problems occurring, because we need those people with the knowledge and the wisdom and the compassion and the empathy in order to integrate everything that's happening. So what I had mentioned is that, it's like a kid, if it becomes widely available, the psychedelic substances, like if some teenager or something gets a hold of it and they go to school, thinking it was weed, and all of a sudden they're in a full-blown experience, people can panic, and people panic in any situation. They do irrational things. So what's needed is a mechanism of integration like that of other cultures that have done this for thousands of years. That the shamans, the people who know how to work this invisible landscape, the ones that can integrate and guide you through these things. Because without that type of knowledge, then things can go wrong. So like I said, my first experience, I was freaked out, but I handled it, and I came out stronger. For other people, that might not be the case.
Yeah. I think well, you can obviously have really transformative psilocybin experiences without a guide or without a shaman present. And I certainly haven't had any experiences with a shaman, psilocybin experiences with a shaman present. I can imagine that in the same way that the presence of a shaman or a guide that has come from a community that has been using these medicines for, hundreds or thousands of years can make a real difference in the same way that it does with other plant medicines. So
Yeah. So what I'm saying, yeah, I've never been with a shaman either. I've never had a guided experience, psychedelic experience either. And I'm an advocate. I'm thinking about full legalization, widespread availability. And so that means like anybody, I mean, of course there'd be age restrictions and things like that, but I still think that on a wide scale, certain people wouldn't react right. And they could definitely benefit from these types of initiations, these types of wisdom from shamans, and maybe even education at an early age. Like maybe they could teach in school one day, like, yeah, this stuff is legal, it's out there, but here's what you need to know. Just basic education, basically.
yeah, exactly. I think legalization doesn't have to mean that this is saying to the public that this is something that's safe for everyone to use, without really thinking about it. I think it's definitely important, like you said, to make sure that people are educated on the kinds of effects that it can have. But yeah, with legalization, I think, I think we're very far away from it getting to that point, if it ever does. But I think there are positive movements being made in selected states like Oregon, California, and Colorado. I read a kind of starting to make some efforts towards utilizing psilocybin for medicinal use, which is really exciting. I think that's probably going to be the biggest breakthrough with psilocybin is going to be the ways in which it
Yes.
helps people that need its therapeutic and its transformative benefit, rather than the people that want to, take it and go and giggle in a field for 6 hours.
Right. Well, it's a good first step, though. Yeah, therapeutic and clinical and medical. So, yeah, if you can show it can help people, that'll open the door to many possibilities. And who knows, when once a few states approve it, then there could be a snowball effect. The rest of the country, over to the UK, and anywhere else.
Yeah, absolutely. No, you're right. I think it's really positive. And I think the point that you made before about its lack of commercial potential in the same way that cannabis has is actually a really good thing. I think we have a lot to be optimistic about with psilocybin, both in terms of changing attitudes and also the legality and the trials that are happening right now.
Yeah, indeed.
Okay, perfect. Well, Tim, I think that's a great place to end the podcast. Thank you so much for coming on the show.
My pleasure, and thanks for having me. And yeah, I can't. My parents will probably be listening to this, so I hope I haven't freaked them out too much.
Yeah, mine too. Okay, thank you.
All right, take care. Thanks.
Once again, thank you to our sponsor Publicize. Visit their website if you want to find out more about their PR for growth packages, their free resources, or even schedule a call. And for a limited time only, exclusive to Brains Byte Back listeners, you can receive an SEO assessment as part of your package for any tier of service at no extra charge with this special promotion. To find out more, visit publicize.co/BBB.
That's it for today. Thanks for listening. I really hope you enjoyed this final installment of the mini-series. Feel free to tweet us with any thoughts on the show at the Sociable, and you can subscribe to the Brains Byte Back podcast on Spotify, Stitcher, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you listen to your podcasts.